Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Riverwalk Talk. My name is Chip Harrington. This is a little podcast I started about 3 months ago or so, kind of just a kind of community service, bring some awareness about some issues and introduce you to some people that maybe you have known in the area but just never really knew their full story. Last week we had a really good and important discussion about childhood mental health and teenage suicide. This week it's also going to be kind of a heavy subject and an important one as well too, but it's going to be really more focused on addiction and services that are available and people who have kind of fallen into some of the realm of addiction over the years. If anybody out there has ever struggled, this is one thing that we all have in common, is that we all know somebody that has that is struggling or has struggled and is kind of working through addiction. But years and years ago, in the 90s, all these pain management clinics opened up all over the place, and there was some doctors out there that were kind of really just over-prescribing some things. So there's been a lot of changes legislatively that have come down to kind of help people who are struggling. So today's show, I'm going to talk to an individual that had a real kind of a high-profile case situation several years ago, and we're going to talk to him about his struggle and how he kind of has pulled it together, and kind of it's I guess you could say it's a success story, and he's does a lot of public speaking now about where he has been and how he got there. And that is my friend Mr. Tom Foye. What's up, Tom?
Hello.
So how tall are you?
I'm 6'6".
Yeah, so this is going to be challenging for me to hold this camera and keep you in frame at the same time while we do the whole thing.
You may need another length of extension on that, right?
I could actually make it a little longer. So let's go up here on the sidewalk over here. So thanks, Tom, for coming out. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, I think there's some important messages that people need to hear, so thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really important. And I've heard you speak numerous times. You're a tremendously well-spoken individual with a really important story.
Thank you.
But before we kind of get into that stuff, congratulations, you're a granddad.
I am.
You're a grandfather now.
I'm absolutely a grandfather.
Like a new one. Like how old are you?
Brand new, like 3 months.
Yeah.
And about 1 month.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
A little grandson and a little granddaughter.
Yeah, how's everybody doing?
Everybody's great. Everybody's great. For me, as we started to discuss some of the story and some of the outcome of the story, when I received word that my daughters were pregnant and they were going to be bearing grandchildren, it just hit me. I felt as though in some ways my journey had come full circle, in that all the experiences that I had, difficulties, challenges, things that I had overcome, all of it was divinely intended to help me get to a point where with these grandkids I'm going to be able to teach them and show them things that no one else could.
Yeah. Well, that is very, very true. And I'm very thankful to have a little grandbaby myself, and he's out in Missouri.
Yeah.
So we don't see him all the time, but it is, it's like, new phase of life, when you kind of are, you're a parent and now your kids are having kids. It's a change, and it's a really cool change. Interesting in that way. So congratulations to all the Foyes. I said at the top of the show about, I want to talk about addiction. The situation that you kind of found yourself in several years ago was really a high profile case.
Yeah.
You're a member of the Ludlow Police Department, a lieutenant, high ranking member when this whole thing went down. So if you can kind of walk us through, not going all the way back to the beginning, but how did you kind of fall into the grips of addiction?
Well, so it's kind of funny. No, not necessarily funny, right? That here we are in this particular weekend, right? This particular weekend being around Memorial Day weekend used to have some real significance to me, right? In a couple of different ways. One, the triathlon, right? It was right around this time, or maybe the week after, right? Right around this time period. And then also was the Memorial Day parade, right? And I remember, that having meaning to me, right? Being a member of the police department, being part of a brotherhood, everybody coming together, being representatives of justice and service in the community, marching in the parade and having people say, "Oh, there's Ludlow's finest." It was a really good feeling. And I sometimes say, right, when I talk about the story, it's the story I wasn't supposed to tell.
Right.
Right. Not in a secretive sense, but in the sense that this was not my story. I was not headed in this particular direction, right? So I was living my life, doing pretty well. I had exceeded my aspirations as far as my career as a police officer from when I was a new recruit in the police academy.
Yep.
As far as my having been in the detective bureau at a relatively early age, or I think I had like two years on the job at that time. I was promoted to the rank of sergeant relatively early. Eventually I was assigned to an FBI Safe Streets task force. I was deputized by the FBI. I graduated from the FBI National Academy. I did these things that I thought were, one, inconsistent with the stigma associated with addiction, and two, these are all things that you'd think that could immunize you from that kind of a disease, right? So short version is injuries, surgeries, exposure to painkillers, and it was just a downward spiral at that point.
Yeah, we're getting rained on a little bit. We're out here on the Riverwalk, and then there's kind of like these spotty showers, so if we have to duck under a tree, we'll do that. Or maybe I'll just duck under you.
Yeah, I'll be doing a lot of ducking.
You can do
if there's lightning, run away. So you don't want to be standing next to me.
So you talk about the triathlons. I mean, you and I have done triathlons together.
Yeah.
I actually still have your swim thing in my closet.
That's where that is. Okay.
It's still there. I've used your swimsuit, the
wetsuit.
The wetsuit that we use. So one thing I can say about Tom, I've known you for a long, long time. You and your brother and I worked together at Howland Pond. We were lifeguards. I met you back in the 80s. And I've said this to people, is that when you go into something, you go into it hard. You are a type A person, meaning like when you were training for a triathlon, you were just like up at 4:30, getting your steps in, swimming, and same thing with your career as far as a police officer. You got your master's degree, went to the FBI Academy, so you have that personality where it's kind of like when you decide to do something, man, you are going for it.
And you know what, that worked for me too in a lot of ways, in that spilled into my job. I remember Jim McGowan, former police chief, would tell a story how there was a bank robbery in town, and the perpetrator had run across the Randall's parking lot. And Karen Randall, right, we had used her videotape, etc., in order to track where the perpetrator had gone. And later on, she had remarked to Chief McGowan, she goes, "My God, I wouldn't want those guys ever chasing me someday."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not in the context of having done anything wrong, but I mean, that's just I put everything into it. And I love this community. I've always loved this community, which is one of the reasons I stayed here despite everything that happened.
Yeah.
But I almost took crimes like that personally. They affected people's sense of safety.
Yep.
Right? And I wanted to resolve that, to put people at ease. So.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, you kind of go full bore into it. So you're kind of ascending through the ranks.
Yep.
Well known. Got elected to the school committee. Served on the school committee for a period of time.
Yep.
Like you said, you're kind of a very prominent person.
Did some soccer coaching. Not that I was a good soccer coach, but nonetheless, I got involved.
Yep. Yeah. Very active parent. You and your wife Beth, very active in the community. So you had some surgeries. What were the surgeries, first of all?
Torn rotator cuff on the left and right shoulders, and then later it was a hip replacement. Okay.
So as a result of that, was when you were introduced to, hey, you might need some of this stuff. It's going to be because those are all painful surgeries that you had to deal with.
Well, I remember, right, through the course of my experience, you've heard me talk about this before, right? And I tell people, you can't scare this disease out of people.
Yep.
Right? I've been on all the calls. I've seen the overdoses.
Yep.
We cut down the nooses. We read the goodbye letters. We would find the trajectory of bullets, etc., after entering and exiting people's bodies, etc. And all the while, I would say, what is it about something like this? What is it about a substance? We stand on the sidewalk.
Yeah, we're going to the sidewalk.
That could make somebody do this to themselves, right? I didn't get it. And we say in the recovery world, if you don't got it, you don't get it.
Yes.
And I remember, right, despite everything I just described, I remember having come back from my surgery and taking my first OxyContin. And I just remember this whoosh came over my body, right? Listen, I'm the guy that went to all the autopsies. I already knew what the cause of death was, etc. But that whoosh came over my body. My spontaneous thought, right, was, wow,
Really?
I can see how someone can get hooked on this stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So from the person that I was, God, country, service, etc., exposure, right, to being exposed to that drug, and it completely changed my mindset.
Really? I mean, essentially, OxyContin, it's like synthetic heroin, right? It's got the same properties as like a heroin. And I work in the correctional system. I talk to people who are in recovery, and they kind of describe a very similar thing in that, like, yeah, they smoked weed and they did some things, but many of them will say, like, when they got that first hit of heroin, it was kind of like, oh, this is going to be a problem. Like,
yeah. And I wouldn't say that I necessarily said that to myself the first time.
Yeah.
But I understood. And part of the problem with me was because I was that guy.
Yeah.
I thought, well, that's never going to happen to me.
Right.
That not me. That might be somebody else. It might be everybody else out there. But
Yep.
I would be the last guy.
Mm-hmm. So when you had your first surgeries and you kind of had a little taste of that, but you kind of put them away and moved on and went back to work and did your thing.
Yep.
But then suddenly another surgery came up.
Right. And I found that with each time, I need a little bit more to get the same effect. And without knowing, right, I was kind of looking forward to it. I was thinking, well, okay, I'm going to stay home for a few weeks. I'm going to get some of the good medication, right?
Yep.
And so, one, tolerance, right? That's an indicator of a growing addiction, needing more. Two, feeling as though it relieved maybe some psychological things, right? When you ingest that stuff, there are no worries in your life.
Oh, really?
You're no longer worried about bills. You're not worried
Seriously?
about getting up for work on time.
Yeah.
Everything, just creates this euphoria where there are no worries in life mentally. And that affects your memory in your brain.
Yeah.
It affects your rewards system in your brain, right? And it kind of cuts a pathway between your midbrain to your frontal lobe area, whereby the frontal lobe is no longer sending back messages to your midbrain to say, no, stop.
Interesting. How about at home? Did your wife, did your kids, did they realize that, like, hey, Dad seems like I know he had some surgery, but he's maybe using this stuff too much? Was there any of that talk? Anybody indicate that?
No. I think one, we say lie till you die. And I lied, right? I betrayed everybody in this process. I would make excuses. I would tell them other things, etc. In some instances, I would actually try to get, my wife to believe it was her that had some kind of a problem.
Oh, wow.
So
interesting.
Very defensive, etc. And obviously, she was suspicious. I think she knew that something was going on, but she didn't know exactly what.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now you have some more surgeries. Was there a point when you sitting alone, you're like, this thing is bigger than me now? Was there a point where you realized that you had kind of gone down that hole?
So basically, I had a couple episodes where I gotten really sick, right? Because I didn't have what I needed, right?
Yeah.
So withdrawal, that's another factor concerning the disease of addiction. So I was going through incredible withdrawal, and I had escaped withdrawal, or gotten through it. Then there was another point at which I say it's kind of like drawing a line in the sand, right? You draw a line in the sand, you say, I'm never going to do that, I'm never going to do that, right? Mm-hmm. But then, your doctor might say, well, you're a bigger guy, you can take a little bit more, right? And I never said, oh my God, is he being responsible with the dispensing of narcotic medication, right? My mind said, oh, this guy's a medical prodigy. Right. That's exactly what I need is more, right?
Yeah, okay.
So, so the more continues, the more increases. And next thing you know, I've crossed that line so many times that I'm 2 miles ahead of where I started, back into it again. So that's the point at which it was a kind of an inadvertent experience of my going into the evidence room. Mm-hmm. And I went into the evidence room, and I saw what was there, and I shut the door, and I challenged my thoughts. I was like, oh my God, what am I thinking? What am I thinking, right? Everything you want is right there, right now. And that's one of the manifestations of the disease, right, is the obsessive thinking.
Yep.
And as much as I told myself, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, I went in and I did it.
Yeah.
Right, I took what I wanted when I wanted it. And I'd reached a point eventually, to answer your question, where I was sitting in my chair At that point, I dumped out all the seltzer water because I was filling my seltzer cans with vodka.
No kidding.
And I had a pill in my pocket. I went into the bathroom, and my experience had taught me how to increase the effectiveness of these things, right? So I knew if I crushed it and I snorted it, it would enhance the experience. And that's actually what I was doing with them at the time.
Wow.
So I remember looking up in the mirror. I didn't even know who I was. I didn't recognize the eyes of the guy on the other side of the mirror.
Yep.
And I was sort of perplexed, but I was struck emotionally. Like I felt lost. I felt as though I didn't have a soul. I was thinking about, my wife and kids and my career and everything that I was losing. But, I can't emphasize enough, and this is important for the listeners, right, is to know that despite all that, right, I still could not stop. I had this emotional epiphany. I took that pill, I brushed it in the sink, I flushed it down the water, tears in my eyes. I'm begging God, please help me stop. Please help me stop, right?
Yep.
And I said, that's it. I swear I'm never going to do it. And as you described, I was a disciplined guy,
Yep.
right? I went back and I sat down in that chair, but I say that this disease is like a ceiling fan, right? Where there's a label on each blade of the fan. And it spins and it says, you want it, go get it. You need it now. Well, you've got one more in your pocket.
Yep.
Well, you know what? Yeah, it's Friday at 9, so you can quit, but you've got till midnight today, then start fresh tomorrow. That sounds silly, but when I cite that experience to other people in recovery, they absolutely identify with that, right? So despite having this emotional epiphany that's powerful and should have been motivating for me to quit, an hour later, I'm back in that same bathroom, and I crush a pill and I snort it.
So it was just easy to justify in your head, move that goalpost one more day, tomorrow's the day when I start my recovery, kind of a thing.
That's kind of a challenging question in the context of, I'm not going to say it was easy, but the disease overcomes your will.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost comparable to, a possession, if you will. Right?
Yeah.
It just, your will is gone. You are no longer to produce thoughts, in some ways, to resist.
Yeah.
And that's why, loved ones might shake somebody and say, why? Why do you keep doing this? And you know what? One, we may not know why. Two, we just can't stop.
Yeah.
We just can't stop. So I say, God answers prayers. He doesn't always answer them the way that we want them to be answered. But in my scenario, he did send angels. Those angels didn't have halos or billowy white wings.
Yeah.
Right? They were state police investigators assigned to the Attorney General's office. And my door, I was in the lieutenant's office, sit at my desk, the door came open, and they placed me under arrest. But here's something that I think is important to recognize. Like you would think in that instance or in that moment, I would have been petrified, right? But I really was relieved.
Yeah.
I had this sense of relief because I knew something that nobody else knew, something I had been hiding for so long. And I wanted to tell people, but you just don't tell people, right?
Yeah.
Because of the stigma, because of my potential. And in my mind, I thought I was going to be the next chief of police.
Yeah, a lot of us did.
And I was so afraid that revealing this would result in, that's it, that's the end of my career, which, by comparison now, I wish I would have said something to somebody,
Of course,
right?
yeah, right.
So I was relieved. I was absolutely relieved. I remember these guys came in, and listen, I was a guy who was trained in defensive tactics. I was in charge of our special response team, etc. And, and looking back, I felt bad for these guys because, listen, and like you said, I'm a 6'6" guy, about 250 pounds, and, I feel bad for what I put them through.
Sure.
And that they came into my office and they arrested me. I remember being walked out the door, and there were people in tears, and that's the hard part about this whole thing is I know I broke people's hearts. Like people later on told me, Tom, I saw you on the news and I cried for you, and that's really hard. But in that moment, I knew, one, I was going to live, and two, as early of a seed that was planted at that time, I couldn't waste this experience. Like I knew I had to do something about this. People's understanding of this disease is all wrong, and I had to somehow inform or educate people.
Yeah, well, you certainly have taken, again, to your personality of go get it, you have taken recovery to a whole nother level as far as getting the word out and educating. Because you're an addiction counselor now, right? During this whole process.
I actually went back to school. So I had some experiences, right? So I had about 14 months in recovery before I was eventually sentenced to jail.
Yep.
So I went to jail. I was sentenced to 2 years in jail with 5 years Superior Court probation. So, I did all my good time, did my stuff, got involved in my programs. I got a parole after 1 year and was back in school, became a counselor, started working in the field. And as you know, began speaking, jails, hospitals, colleges, conferences, forums, etc., documentaries, TV, news, radio, etc. Only because, not that I'm any better than anybody else, but it was just like you said, it was a high-profile case.
Yes, very much so.
So I began as a counselor. I became a program director of a 30-bed program for women. And then, as you know, Sheriff Cochee was looking to start a Section 35 program, partly due to a female who, based on a lack of equity within the state, became deceased after, a 2-hour drive to the nearest Section 35 program, right? So you want to open something locally. And, we had been in touch, we communicated. He was always there for me,
Kudos to him too, for because your case was so high profile, pulling you in, but you're somebody that walked the walk at that point. So who could be more relatable than somebody like yourself at that time?
Yeah, so he pulled me into the Section 35 program, and I appreciate that too, right? And I think what I appreciate is, I don't know, like there's a lot of places I could work, right? I could be treating people who maybe their lives were a little more gifted or silver spoon-ish or esque, if you will. But the Section 35 program is where this is like the Navy SEALs of recovery.
Right.
This is where it's super intense. These are folks who are on the absolute strongest threshold or level of denial, and bringing them back and helping them is tremendously difficult. It's tremendously challenging.
Right.
But I think with my experience, and as you had described me, it's exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
So he promoted me to a supervisor, and then a little while back I became a program manager. So for the most part now I'm sort of in charge. I manage the whole discharge process. And that entails basically developing or assuring the development of comprehensive quality discharge plans to our clients so they have the best opportunities for success when they leave, and two, that those plans address or match the risk factors that were part of their court assessment also. So I also run a unit. It's probably our more complicated mental health and medically compromised unit also.
Okay. Just back up a little bit. So just to explain Section 35, Section 35 is a process that a family, loved ones can go through to have somebody committed to a program, even like to your point, even if they're not really ready themselves to do it because they're a danger to themselves in that sense. So it's not jail, but it is a secure environment, and people like Tom and others who are in recovery or trained are usually the ones that kind of step in and do that. So to your point, it can be a really challenging population to work with.
Absolutely.
Because they're not really, they haven't really hit that wall.
We have a phenomenal team too. And sometimes I sit in these meetings every month at my program with about a big giant round or big square table with other supervisors and managers. I think about my life, and when I think about how things happened in the beginning, how I talked about this not being the story I was supposed to tell, but when I'm seated at that table in these monthly meetings with all these other managers, etc., I think, man, like I would have really missed something had I not had the opportunity to meet these great people that I work with.
Yeah.
The effort that they put forward in helping people, how smart they are, their compassion, etc.
Yeah.
And when I look at it that way, when I look at the opportunities I've been given, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Just like I'm exactly the guy that my grandkids are going to have for a grandfather, right? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be at this point.
It's your purpose. It's been certainly a journey, from where you were to where you are now. Kind kind of going into, when you were arrested, there was, implications, I guess, where there was implications as far as you're a public employee,
Yeah.
you lose your pension,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So you're sort of hitting that reset button on kind of, your journey as far as just, career-wise as well,
Right.
too.
Right.
Has that been, I mean, of course it's a challenge, but has that component been something that you are kind of just, ready and willing to kind of hit that reset button and start all over?
Well, I mean, I kind of had no choice, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I had to start all over again. And there's times, too, that I think that, because I did lose my retirement, and I am starting all over, contributing to the retirement system, et cetera.
Yeah.
And, that does hurt. There's an implication with that for my family as
Yeah.
well, right? It's created some hardships for them. But I guess, when I think about the plan, I sometimes feel as though, well, what if I did get my retirement back? Then what? Would I retire?
Right. No.
And then would I be in the same place?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think that, I guess when I look at it, God's not done with me yet. Right?
Yeah.
There's something that was tragic. It happened, but I'm there, and there's a plan. And sometimes what I begin to think, or what I have become to think, is I think maybe my plan A was never really my plan A. And maybe this is really my plan A right now.
Sure.
I was living my plan B all along.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So you're a Ludlow guy, even though, you're kind of an Air Force brat here. We're going to go over here and spin around, put the clock behind us over here. Right over here. So your dad was in the Air Force, but you've, as far as I'm concerned, you're kind of a pretty
keep walking?
solid Ludlow guy. No, I like to finish with the clock tower
Oh,
behind
okay.
us.
All right. There's still a lot more.
Listen, let me direct the show, will you? Just focus on your thing. So, but like you say, you're a Ludlow guy.
Yeah.
And like I said, this was such a high-profile case.
Yeah.
Was it challenging? Was it embarrassing to kind of step back out into the community and have to face this dead on?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I remember one of the most difficult things I ever did was I'd gone away to a detox treatment, came back here, was going to an intensive outpatient program, and I think it was Morgan had a soccer game. And I said, I got two choices. I can either isolate and hide, or I can go out there. And what had actually happened to me was I met someone outside of the bank, and he was someone that I had had encounters with in my career, right? Gotten into trouble now and then, had issues similar to what I had experienced. And he said, something, Tom? He says, I just got to get out of here. Like, I can't face people.
Yeah.
And everybody judges you, and everybody wants to stigmatize and criticize. And, I think that the timing of that happened right at the right time. And I said to myself, I'm not going anywhere. I said, for this guy and other people out there, right, who are struggling, like, I'm staying put. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily do that for me because, man, believe me, I do have those days where I wake up and I say, oh my God, you got to get out there and face people. It does revisit you from time to time, but
sure.
I'm reminded of that guy. And I do it so that other people in this community, right, listen, use me. If you don't feel like getting out of bed one day, right, you're ashamed, right, you have regret and remorse. I know what all those feelings feel like deeply. You know what? I stay because if I can do it, you can do it. And I'll tell you something that I know to be the case. Everybody in this community has something in their lives.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody has, gets a visit from the shit fairy from time to time.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just unfortunate. But, strength doesn't show up when I'm strong. Strength shows up when I'm laying in bed in a ball and I think I can't do it today. And I'm right on the brink of saying, no, I can't do it. That, in those milliseconds, is where you define your strength, right? And where you grow when you decide, I'm getting up and I'm moving forward, right? So, I don't think I've ever had it in me to just quit and give up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Other than, the disease and treating it, et cetera, and putting in the work, right?
Yeah.
I truly believe that, and here's the blessing. Here's the absolute blessing that confirms this to be my truth. My phone rings. Mm-hmm. Like my phone rings. People from town, Tom, this person's struggling. Can you help them? Can you guide them? Tom, other police officers, and I don't want to say I'm solely the resource for police officers, but I've got a friend of mine on the Springfield Fire Department just runs into people, knows people, etc. Tom, hey, this guy, can I give him your number? Can I give him your number? People from all over the state. And, whenever that phone rings, and usually what I find is that phone rings when I'm in some kind of a lousy mood and I don't feel like answering the phone, and I look at it and I answer the phone, hello, and it's somebody who needs help. So I say I've been through hell and back, right? But I'm glad to have been able to do that, because that's what I did as a police officer, right? I was willing to put myself out there, take risks to benefit other people, etc. And I still get to do that today. How
about your relationship with the men and women that you worked with, the police department? How have you been in contact? How's that relationship?
I haven't necessarily reached out to anybody, but I have seen people from time to time. And the cool thing is, well, I'll tell you a couple of stories, right? Mike Brennan, right? Danny Velatis. And I got to give them a lot of credit in a way, because I remember going to that soccer game, and I remember Danny Velatis was one of the guys who was working that job. I saw Mike Brennan, gave me a big hug and a handshake despite everything that had happened. He didn't care what other people thought about me, which taught me to stop thinking about what other people thought about me. Danny Velatis actually walks up and down the aisle looking for me, walked right up to me in front of this giant crowd at the soccer game and gave me a hug in front of everybody. Right? That was just like a tremendous endorsement. Derek DeBarge is a guy, right? My kids had his phone number, Dana Vignall, right? Derek DeBarge, my daughter's got a flat tire. They knew they could call Derek DeBarge, and that guy showed up and he fixed it. You know what I mean? So, I do see people, and listen, some people I don't see, and I don't go seeking them out. You know what I mean? One thing too that I do want to say while I'm here, right, is I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry, everybody. I truly, truly am sorry. And I wish I could have gone and knocked on 21,000 doors and told everybody that I'm sorry. But, when you can't do that, there's something that we call a living amends. And I think that, my redemption and my amends is based on my staying here, my being available to help people, making myself available to help people, my working where I do work, right? And the message in all that too isn't just about me, it's about for other people who think, man, how am I ever gonna overcome this? How am I ever gonna be able to look people in the face again? And just, we say hope, hold on, pain ends, don't quit before the miracle happens, right? So, hang in there.
Right. Well, I mean, you definitely have been, like you said, to hell and back, but your backstory has been pretty remarkable. It really has. I've watched from the side. You're a friend. You've always been a friend. You always will be a friend. But I've certainly watched from the side.
I left you out. With what? You've always been there too, man. You've always been there too. Never turned your back on me. And people like you having faith in me helped me restore faith in myself, right? I had to borrow from the interest of your bank in faith in me until I finally had it in myself. You know? So I'm grateful for that too.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, like I said, we've known you for a long time. It was never a question in my family and I. Connor, he was in boot camp at the time when the whole thing happened. He was just like, Dad, what's going on? And it was just, it was a shock to people. But at the same time, it was a lesson for him as a young person that wow, this thing, it catches anybody, it catches you wherever you are. So,
but I didn't get here alone, right? I didn't get here alone, right? And that's something else too for other people to know, right? My wife has just been this steadfast, loyal, confidant in many ways, and she just, marriage is marriage. You know what I mean? And you have those days I've learned to bite my tongue in some ways when, I keep in mind that when things were unsteady, when we weren't sure about paying the bills, she sold her jewelry and she kept me, Wow. And the same thing with my kids. Mackenzie had gotten married a little while back, right? You were at the wedding. And, for my having been through what I've been through, but walking her down the aisle was just so meaningful for me as just, self-forgiveness, forgiveness. The night before her wedding, she had slept at our house in, kind of accordance with the traditions of the wedding, etc. And I pulled out a book from the basement that I read to her when she was like 3 or 4 years old. And I read that book to her, and she outdid me, right? She handed me this letter that she had written for me. And in the letter, she asked me to forgive myself, right? At that time, I had about 10 years in recovery, and
Right.
she's still asking me or talking to me about forgiving myself. And then she hands me this box with a charm in it, and I wear it today. When I was in jail, I had written her a letter that said, life is tough, but if we stick together, we are tougher. And she had the back of the medal engraved to say, we are tougher, right? So I think that there are many lessons that I was able to teach them, not by what I told them necessarily, but by what I did, right? I put my head down and I put in the work in recovery, and you know, the results are positive. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
But I know I didn't get here alone. I had a lot of support.
Oh, for sure, yeah, and I think people recognize that. So, well, it's an amazing story, and thanks. I do appreciate you coming on and telling it. I think it's important, you know. Granted, that I'm a Ludlow guy, and we do this in Ludlow, but this is this is all over. This is a countrywide, a worldwide situation. So hopefully, people see this will kind of, if they are struggling, if they know somebody who's struggling, then they'll be able to, you know, maybe even reach out to you. You might be somebody that they reach out to. So
go to, I mean, for starters, what I always tell people is check the card on the back of your insurance. You have a family member who's suffering, you know, check the insurance, see what is available through your insurance. That's one of the easiest ways of doing it. There's also helplinema.org, helplinema.org. That's on the mass.gov website. And then there's another one, startyourrecovery.org, that can be of assistance too. And my suggestion is, if you know somebody who's struggling, have a plan in place and a place for them to go already, right? And say, hey, I know this is going on. Here's what we got. We can get you to this place right now if you're willing, and have that available.
yeah,
It gives that person a lot less time to think, right? Because we say it's a thinking disease. It's loaded with stinking thinking, and we'll talk ourselves out of that opportunity in short time.
I'll put those links in here, so if anybody is looking for that, I'll put the link there so you can just jump right onto it from here. So again, Tom, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. That's going to do it for this week's podcast. I do have a YouTube channel, so if you want to see some other shows, like I mentioned last week, we had a real important discussion about teenage suicide and mental health with young people. And you know, I got another show coming up pretty soon that's going to be focused on some recovery and support for people as well too. So that's going to do it. I'll see you guys very soon.